Hey everyone, today I'm going to be talking about the 3D Touch APIs, but first a little bit about myself, because I'm pretty sure we haven't met, a lot of us haven't met yet. My name is Meghan Kane, and I'm currently working as an iOS engineer at SoundCloud in Berlin. It's a music streaming app, and this is my first time in Japan, and I'm really excited to be here, so thank you all for coming. So just to set the overview of what we're going to be going through today, first we're going to take a look at an overview of 3D Touch and why it rocks. Then we're going to go through how you can integrate this into your app. 3D Touch support was first introduced in iOS 9 in 2015, and it was improved upon in iOS 10 last year. There are about 5 different integrations, so we'll take a tour through each of these. And then last but not least, we'll take a deep dive into the APIs, because probably a lot of you are developers out here, so we want to see how we can actually build these integrations into our app. Okay, sorry. Okay. So the last thing we'll look at is a deep dive into the APIs so we can see how we can actually build these integrations into our app. Probably most of you have heard of 3D Touch before, but just in case, we can take a zoom out to look at a little history. 3D Touch was first introduced with the iPhone 6s in September 2015. And any phone that came out later than that is equipped with a 3D touch display that can sense the pressure that a user just applies to the screen. Apple apparently spent 5 years working on this, so it was quite a bit in the making. So it's ever the more reason why we should integrate this into our apps. Starting with iOS 9, these APIs were exposed for us to utilize. So why should we add 3D touch support to our apps? From a product perspective, 3D Touch integrations speed up the time it takes for your user to get to the features that they want to use in your app. More and more each year, Apple is introducing ways for the user to interact with apps without actually opening them the traditional way. We've seen all sorts of extensions come out in the past couple of years. 3D Touch is another way to get to the feature in the app without going through many screens to get there. We're competing for users' attention more and more each year, so this is a way to circumvent that. Another thing that is a benefit of integrating 3D Touch into your app is that you can get some more visibility in the App Store. Apple actually has a section in Featured called Enhanced for 3D Touch, so you can potentially reach more users if you've integrated this. Most importantly, though, the 3D Touch APIs are actually really easy to use. So that's the reason why I wanted to talk about these with you today, because if you haven't had experience with them yet, it can be a really simple way to provide quick wins to your users. So let's get started on our tour of what options are available for integrating 3D Touch support into your app. So we're going to take a look at home screen quick actions, widgets, which are formerly Today extensions, but were renamed in iOS 10, peek and pop, custom UI preview interactions, and notification content extensions. I thought it'd be nice to look at how we integrate these 3D Touch integrations through the lens of building an app. So for the purpose of this talk, I created an app called Caribou app, and it's a phrasebook app that provides you with the phrases you need in a foreign language, so in this case, Japanese, to help you in a particular situation. So, for example, when you open the app, you'll see familiar everyday experiences like going to a cafe, going to a bar, or asking for directions. You can tap on cafe, for example, in the Experiences tab, and the app will show useful phrases for ordering a cup of coffee or tea, and you'll see the text as well as be able to hear the audio. So with this sample app in mind, Caribou, let's add home screen quick actions to it. So you can see that there are 3 actions that appear when the user 3D touches on the app. And you're able to provide up to 4. So you should prioritize what you think would be most important to your users and provide them a high value. So in this sample app, we have 2 static quick actions, search and saved phrases, and one dynamic quick action at a cafe. I'll go through the differences between static and dynamic quick actions. And probably you've seen some of these before. So static quick actions are set once and generated during compile time. They're available as soon as the app is installed. To provide static quick actions, it's super simple. All you have to do is define what the quick actions will be in the info plist file. So you can provide up to 4, but then your app will only be able to have static quick actions. So in this screenshot of the info plist, there are 2 shortcut items that were provided. So out of the properties that you need to define in the info plist, there are 2 that are required and 3 that are optional. So the 2 that are required are very straightforward. There's a UI application shortcut item type. This is used as an identifier later on when you decide what to do when the user selects that quick action. The other one that's required is the UI application shortcut item title. It's a bit of a tongue twister. And that's very self-explanatory. That's just what the user sees when they 3D touch on your app icon. So those were static quick actions. Now on to dynamic quick actions. These are registered in your app at runtime. So if the user has never used the feature that generates a dynamic quick action, they won't appear. Dynamic quick actions are defined using the same shortcut item class as static quick actions, but instead of being in the info plist, you'll just define it when it makes sense to store that as a dynamic quick action. So for example, if the user in the Caribou app just tapped on going to a cafe, that might be a good point to add a shortcut item at a cafe. So we would create that shortcut item and then add it to the UI application's shortcut item array. So that gets us through what the user sees when they 3D touch on the app icon, but how do we bridge this with the action that happens when they tap on the quick action? So for instance, if they tap on a save phrase, you want to go to the Save Phrases tab. So in the app delegate, your application will receive callbacks when the user selects a quick action. So this is when you want to check the UI application shortcut items type. And according to that type, you want to deep link the user to the appropriate place. So for the Caribou, there was search, saved, and recent experience. So you would deep link into each of those tabs. Okay, now on to widgets. I find that it's interesting that Apple decided to rename Today extensions to widgets, and they're trying to feature them a little bit more than they were in the past. So in order to take advantage of widgets, which appear when you 3D touch the app icon, all you need to do is convert your Today extension, if you already had one for your app, into providing 2 different display modes, compact and expanded. So when you 3D touch the app icon, the compact mode shows up. So you just need to make sure that it's implemented so that the right information is going to be shown. So it's a super simple process. So peek and pop. This is the next 3D touch interaction we'll explore. You're probably familiar with this one as well. It's used in lots of Apple's apps, such as Photos, and some really popular 3D party apps, such as Slack and Instagram. Peek and pop lets you preview content, as you can see in the animation, by touching on the content but it allows you to preview what's going on before you commit to navigating to it. So in our example for Caribou, it might be useful for the user to be able to 3D touch on one of the experiences to preview the English to Japanese translations without having to navigate to the screen. But before you actually implement this, there's something really important that you need to do. You need to make sure that you check that the user is able to use 3D Touch, because according to what device they're using, or iOS version, or if they've just decided to turn off 3D Touch capabilities in the system-wide settings, you may or may not be able to take advantage of this. So how do you do this? Whatever view controller is taking advantage of peek and pop needs to check at runtime if the device supports 3D Touch. So we can do this by checking the trait collection's force touch capability property. Apple recommends that you do this in view-did-load. So after you check if the user is able to take advantage of 3D Touch and view-did-load, you need to make sure that you listen for updates on the trait collection, because it's possible for the trait collection's properties to change during runtime. The user can decide to opt out of 3D Touch while they're using your app. So you need to make sure that you either register or unregister for previewing, in this case, for peek and pop, according to if the force touch capability is still available. So since this isn't available for all users, you might be wondering, should we provide some sort of backward compatibility to be able to take advantage of something that's similar to force touch? And Apple suggests that you provide an alternative if you can. The closest interaction that they've suggested is to use UI long press gesture recognizers, press and hold. So this will help alleviate some features that users could be missing out on that don't have the newer devices. So once you have these safety checks in place, though, we can go back to peek and pop. So once you've registered for previewing and view-did-load, your view controller should conform to the UI view controller previewing delegate. This delegate only has two required methods. It has a view controller for location and view controller to commit method. So for view controller for location, for our example, it would pick up on the collection view cell's location for cafe, and it would decide to return the view controller relevant for cafe phrases. And for view controller to commit, this is the view controller that you want to be showing once the user has decided to continue with force pressing. So the view controller is passed in, so all you need to do is call show. So this is like such a dead simple integration into your app. So it really could take such a short amount of time, and it makes sense to add it to your app if you have a relevant feature. So peek and pop allow us to determine when the user was pressing hard enough to activate the threshold at peek and pop, but what if you want to customize the behavior of the app according to the exact pressure the user is sending via 3D Touch? That's when UI preview interactions come in handy. So these were introduced in iOS 10, and they allow you to determine the exact amount that the user is force touching on a view on a scale from 0 to 1. So if the user, when they start pressing, it's going to be closer to 0. As they continue to apply more pressure, we'll get a reading that's closer to 1. So for the Caribou app, for someone who doesn't know any Japanese at all, I don't think that the audio is actually working, or it's very, very low. So I'll quickly explain what's going on. So if you tap on one of the phrases, for example, if you want to ask, or if you want to say that you'll have a coffee, please, you would tap on the first table view cell, and it would start playing the audio in Japanese of how to ask this. And according to the pressure sensitivity reading that you're getting back, it will either play a slowed down version of this phrase or the regular speed. Yeah, I mentioned before that this was introduced in iOS 10, and the scale goes from 0 to 1 soft press to a hard press. So how do we do this? So first you create a UI preview interaction with the source view. So in the example that I just showed, the source view would be the table view cell. And then we would set ourselves as a delegate and implement 2 required functions. So in our case, so for the first function callback that you get when you're conforming to UI preview interaction delegate is preview interaction did update preview transition with the transition progress. So we can change the alpha of the play button that was appearing with the transition progress, and we can change the playback rate according to that transition progress as well. We're also required to implement preview interaction did cancel. So this is when the user picks up their finger from the phone, indicating that their intent is to no longer continue with the preview interaction. In this case, you may want to reverse the actions that you started when they were first touching. In our case, we could take away the play button, so set the playing view to alpha to 0, and pause the playback of the phrase. Okay, so maybe you're getting the gist of it that a lot of these 3D touch integrations really just require implementing some sort of delegate, and then there are 2 or 3 required methods. So like pretty quick way to increase value to your users. So in iOS 10, notifications had quite a bit of changes, and one of the changes that they had were that when you 3D touch on a notification, you can display more content to your user. So 3D touch 3D touch on a notification makes the notification much more interactive. So, okay, the animation's working. So this is a really great way to momentarily capture users' attention for something that is very timely or contextual. So in our example app, I actually integrated with the Foursquare API in order to determine the user's location. And if a user is walking by a coffee shop, then the user will get a notification asking if they're trying to order a coffee in Japanese. And if the user force touches on the notification, then it will come up with the phrase and the translation. So the way that this is done is there are 3 steps for this. So first you need to create a UN notifications framework. This is a separate you need to add the UI notifications framework, and then you need to create a notification extension, which is a separate process from your app. And in this UN notification content extension, you need to conform to the protocol in the view controller. So this new UN notification extension in the view controller and the extension, there's just one required method that you have to implement. It's called did receive, and it receives the notification that was sent through. So in order to determine what to display to the user, your notification should provide information in the user info dictionary that's going to give you enough information to populate the view with whatever is necessary. So in the Caribou app example, we're able to pick up on the phrase from the user info dictionary, and then the phrase has a original phrase and a translation phrase, and so we set the text labels accordingly in the view. Okay, so now I've shown you all the different ways that you can integrate 3D touch into your app. And I think this is a really easy way to save time for the user, and it's as you can see, it's really easy to integrate into your app. And these are some quick wins to keep your users engaged without them having to like go through a more laborious process of like tapping through the app in many different places. I'm going to provide the code samples that I showed in this presentation. So if you follow me on Twitter, I should be tweeting that out in the next few days. Thank you for coming to my presentation.
Hi, my question is about testing. Do you know if there's any way to do automatic testing for 3D Touch?
It's actually such an excellent question, and I'm usually someone who's super adamant about thoroughly testing something, but I haven't actually looked into that. I'm going to look into that, and perhaps in the code samples that I provide, I can, if I come across something, I'll add those.
Hey, that was a great talk. So with the 3D Touch and as well as Apple encouraging the backwards compatibility, are there any frameworks or let's say even wrappers that sort of do this nicely for us?
I actually came across a framework which I think helps with this, but I haven't used it myself. I believe it's called Peak Pop. It's a third-party library that's open source, but I haven't had experience with it myself.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you.